I'm Mica Semrick. I am one of the 3 organizers of the LibreGraphics track this year and all of the years. Thank you all for coming. And special thanks to those of you who stayed. This is Pat David. Both him and I are involved with Pixels.us, a community mostly centered around free software for photographers. You can find us at pixls.us. This is Nathan Willis. Not involved, but one of the 3 of us has a great picture and the other 2 of us don't. So we've got 65 slides. This is the State of the LibreGraphics talk, and we are going to pepper you with bullet points for hopefully less than an hour. So a special thank you before we begin to a lot of people whose names I cannot pronounce, so I won't try, but they actually contributed directly to this presentation so that we didn't have to go find out what actually happened in their projects. They told us. That's amazing. So thank you to them. We're going to start with animation. Obviously, we start with Blender. Blender is amazing, and they should probably have their own track if they wanted it. But this year, the 2.8.x series has been released and is releasing a brand new rewrite, a much sought after left and right mouse click in the 2.8 series is now very predictable as to what it does. New quick favorites menus, new workspaces, Eevee, the real-time renderer, which is great. You don't have to wait for your animations to render down. And you can now do 2D animation with the grease pencil. There's a movement inside of Hollywood to move to Universal Scene Descriptor, which is a file interchange format for moving descriptions of scenes between both proprietary and open software. They also have the MantaFlow system and the Flip Solver. They were the lucky or recipient of the Epic Mega Grant, which is from Epic Games. They set aside $100 million to give to projects that are trying to further the tooling for the video game industry. They got $1.2 million in cash, which is crazy. They'll also be holding their own conference, but BlenderCon at the Henry Fonda Theater here in Los Angeles, June 1st to the 2nd. Tickets are on sale now for $199 if you need your own 2-day conference for Blender. This is their latest release video, but without sound. Oh, I do. Awesome. We need some good tagline like creative freedom starts at blender.org. That is good marketing.
We might want a different tagline than that, but yeah.
Do we? Synfig Studio is another 2D animation software. They had the 1.3.12 release on the 7th of February. This is a beta version, a stable beta version of the upcoming stable version, 1.4. They're now caching their rendered playback to make animation smoother. You can set a custom playback range and loop the playback. You can import video, and you can export animations in web-optimized format. They were accepted to the Google Summer of Code for this summer, so Google will be paying somebody to improve their software, which is awesome. OpenTunes is another 2D animation software mostly used for anime and manga. It's geared towards actually hand drawing and then scanning or photographing the slides and bringing them in and doing that kind of 2D manga style animation. They released version 1.4 on February 20th with guided drawing and auto tweening. They have XDTS file support, cache folder replacement, and clearing, a context-aware toolbar, and they now support capture from a Canon DSLR, which is Windows only for now. Enve is a brand new 2D animation project. It's timeline-based with automatic tweening. All objects and filters properties are animatable. It supports, for now, Bezier curves, ellipse, rectangle, text, brush strokes. They use the very excellent MyPaint for all of their painting, which gives them good, like Wacom tablet support, all the pressure-sensitive brush stuff, and relies on Qt's native graphics tablet support. In drawing and painting, Inkscape 1.0 beta release. Is that right, Ted? Yes, excellent. Native Mac OS app support, which is awesome. You used to need Xcorts or an X11 server to run Inkscape on Mac, which was not the best experience. Much improved, much appreciated. Canvas and mirror rotation support and alignment, high DPI support, which is awesome. Variables fonts if you build with Pango, greater than or equal to 1.41.1, and non-destructive Boolean operations. Krita is mostly geared towards digital painting. In the last year, they received 1,236 new bugs and closed 1,272. They had 2,271 commits from 60 contributors, 9 releases with the current being 4.2.8. Actually, the first application, I believe, of any application, open or proprietary, to do HDR rendering. I believe they got money from Intel and worked closely with Intel on the HDR editing stuff. They're also accepted to Google Summer of Code with 4 students. They had over 2 million, 2.3 million unique direct downloads from krita.org. From my understanding, their direct downloads is not even the bulk of it. The Windows built-in store makes up way more than that. They have over 1,000 active users on their Discourse instance, which is at kritaartists.org. Ooh. They also got an Epic Maker grant for $25,000 to continue their development as well. MyPaint 2.0. MyPaint is another painting application. 2.0 was released in February 2020. The major feature on that is the linear compositing and spectral blending is now used by default. If you don't know what that is, spectral blending is now when you mix 2 colors in MyPaint, it behaves as if you were actually mixing 2 paint colors in real life and not just mixing 2 RGB colors. So if you can mix paint colors in real life, you now get the same behavior in MyPaint, which was much trickier than you would think to actually code and bring that feature out. They have new brush settings, attack angle, zoom level, barrel rotation, 4 new symmetric painting modes, and a flood fill enhancements includes offsets useful when the fill does not flow into the outline sufficiently. Drawpile is a collaborative web application for drawing that allows users to paint on the same canvas simultaneously. Looks like they've mostly had bug fixes except for adding open raster format support in 2.1.17. Also lots of updates to the admin interface. Video editors. kdenlive released in April. April of 2020 will mark the 1-year anniversary of the complete rewrite of kdenlive's timeline feature. They really worked hard to improve the timeline and the stabilization, so hopefully if you're running this release, no more random crashes. They have a 3-point editing and audio mixer, huge improvements due to optimizations in the timeline and preview scaling and monitors. It supports the open timeline, which is another format to interchange between different video and graphics applications for your timeline. You can pitch shift on speed change, so you can speed up or slow down without distorting someone's voice. You can tag and rate clips in the project bin. They're working on a new titler rewrite as part of GSOC. You can record audio directly into the timeline, which might be useful if you're making software tutorials. It's now also easier to keyframe. Expected in the coming year is nested timelines, finishing the OTIO support, audio mapping and rerouting, finishing the new titler. The actual LibreGraphics meeting from whom we kind of pinched this presentation is happening May 26th in France. So if you need a reason to take a vacation, there you go. Olive is a new nonlinear editor since the middle of last year. It's been undergoing a major rewrite to lay a solid future-proof foundation. It has node-based processing, which I'm not sure any other open nonlinear video editor has. A completely new EXR-based caching system, which means it can handle super high bit depth images and video, better memory management, and color management via OpenColorIO. Shotcut released version 20.2.16, which implemented proxy clips, audio pitch filter. So again, you can change the speed of someone's voice without changing the pitch, and over 150 new transitions. Other notable features in the last year is a more flexible timeline, keyframes, a keyframes toolbar, and hotkeys for trimming clips, and like a lot more of everything: filters, transitions, audio effects. They have a full and very long list on their website. How do you actually pronounce this? PTV, but it's probably really anybody's guess. They were accepted last year to the Google Summer of Code and gained a redesigned effects library with thumbnails, a favorites list, and improved search-based results for the thumbnails library instead of a list-based result. OpenShot continues to plow ahead. They released version 2.5 with hardware acceleration. They can open Final Cut Pro and Premiere Pro files. They have a file recovery in case of crashes, a rewritten keyframe system, Blender integration, better SVG handling, improved thumbnail generation in the clips bin, preview window resizing, and cross-platform improvements. The aforementioned Open Broadcaster Studio currently has a release candidate 25, which brings Vulkan-based game capture. Vulkan is the next generation cross-platform graphics rendering, library, driver, API, all of the things. You can now capture browser windows, and there's a browser plugin for Linux to help you capture your Linux web browser. It now supports the SRT protocol for streaming. Version 24, which is the current stable, allows you to pause recording and automatically adjust the bitrate if you're live streaming when it detects network congestion. In the beginning or middle of last year, They launched a sponsorship program via Open Collective and Patreon. I don't know that the Patreon is still going, but they added a bunch of big name sponsors, the latest of which is Facebook. They're a premier sponsor along with Twitch, and they have NVIDIA and Logitech as diamond sponsors. Natron is a nodal-based 3D compositing application, much like the proprietary Nuke. Sadly, development was a little stalled, but one of the main developers has come back to the project again, so they're doing ongoing bug fixes and updating to Qt5, I believe. They also joined us at pixels.us for forum support and discussion.
Mica's throat hurts. Hi guys. I'm just going to go through the photography session real quick, and then I'm going to turn it over to Nate for the font stuff. So, what's going on in the world of photography for free software projects? RawTherapee, one of my personal favorite projects, but don't tell Darktable that. We just built them a new website. Mike and I did this early last year, at the end of last year, roughly. So the brand new website at rawtherapee.com, go check it out. Looks a lot better than it used to, for sure. Mac OS packages are now available. The executable now uses launch services. So the Catalina support is now complete in those releases. And the developer, Alberto Grigio, is that right? I don't know how to pronounce that for sure. Alberto, he has a friendly fork of RawTherapee now that he calls Art. I have another slide for it. He's got a new pipeline with it and some UI refinements. His real goal there was to make it a little bit easier to use and more accessible for new users doing raw image processing than RawTherapee's default interface. So he's added a lot of stuff. He's got some local edits and masking modes for both drawn and parametric masks. He's got a perspective correction tool that he's been working on that's worked out very well. He's got improved metadata handling support thanks to EXIF 2 and the EXIF tool libraries. LibRaw has CR3 support now. Test it. And this happens in RawTherapee as well. If you haven't added TED, you asked about CR3 yesterday, and I didn't want to give it away too soon. That's my big reveal for TED. So, star ratings, color labels, and the rest of all those things are now stored in the sidecar files, the XMP files. And that project is called Art. You can actually find it at on the Pixels forums. You'll find his discussion and then links to his code and things. He hasn't really got a real good website up yet. It is our job for sure. Raw.pixels.us, for those of you that don't know, we are the keepers of all of the donated raw files from various makes and models of cameras across the camera ecosystem. And we do this so that the raw processing libraries have test files to test against, make sure they're able to decode them properly and what have you. And so we took that over, I guess, about 3 years ago, I want to say. About 3 years ago. We used to be, what was it before? Rawsamples.ch is what it was once upon a time, but that owner disappeared, and we had no further updates or availability of files from that, so we took it over at raw.pixels.us. If you have a camera that's not supported, if you visit the site and you have a camera that's not supported yet, please think about just uploading a couple of files for us so that we can make sure that we test it against the various raw processing libraries. So yeah, between 2018 and 2019, we've seen a nice increase of samples. We were up about 15%. We got 1,300 just over 1,300 samples now. Almost 800 various camera models. We got the numbers down for the non-CC0 licensed samples. Part of the problem with the other sample set was they weren't explicitly licensed, and we couldn't continue to use them for some of the tests and things that we would show publicly. And so we're only missing about 165 cameras out of all the available digital cameras. And that's Roman that's mostly been working on that, and Keys or Andabata on the forums. So you can contribute. Come and give us a hand. We've got almost all the backlog for the missing samples up. Growth is slowing, but it's mostly from the fact that we're reaching that peak and now we're just kind of maintaining with new camera models. The RawSpeed raw decoding library is stable, fully OSS fuzz clean. It's got support for 35 new cameras in it. Nothing new has been added for decoders or decompressors this past year, and a lot of it was really about performance tuning and decoding of raw files, which Roman is kind of the, it's, oh, I'm sorry, he's right. I assume people know this sometimes. RawSpeed is the actual decoding library that Darktable uses under the hood to open and decode raw files. I apologize, I should have made that clear. Thank you. Speaking of which, version 3.0, if you guys use Darktable, was out this past year. Brand new GUI, and everything is now themable via CSS. There's a culling mode in the light table view now, panning and zooming the images. There's a timeline view if you want to select images by a date range. The light table's been rewritten to be much faster and works much better on 4K monitors. The Filmic RGB module that Aurelien Pierre has created is available now in a 3 series. This kind of replaces the base curve, shadow, and highlights modules, and any other global tone mapping is now handled, can be now handled through the Filmic module, and then the tone equalizer module. So you lets you remap tones quickly based on things like Adam's zone system. RGB curve and RGB level modules. There's a much better profile denoise module now too. You used to have to use 2 instances of the module, targeting certain frequencies of noise to dampen it. You can just use the 1 instance now. You can do 3D LUTs. These are using either PNG hauled CLUTs or cube LUTs. For those of you that don't know, a LUT is just a color lookup table, and it allows you to map colors from one representation to another by saying, you know, this shade of red should now be slightly browner, and this shade of green should be slightly brighter, and then it will apply that across your image wherever those tones may occur. New tagging module, hierarchical tags and private tags, synonymous searches, and raster masks, and copying parametric masks to other modules in the pixel pipeline so you can reuse them. Yeah, and so Photoflow, this is created by a user on the forum, Andreas Herrero, if you don't know him. It's his own raw image editor that he created, so his workflow is based on non-destructive layers and opacity masks. It's a neat piece of software, and he's put a lot of effort into making sure that things like color management are correct and handled smartly in his application. So he's got a new user interface, dynamic range compression. He's caching things so things are moving a little bit faster now. He fixed up a lot of bugs and added some overall stability to the program. If you get a chance to play with it a little bit, it's fantastic. He first debuted this 6 years ago at LGM in Leipzig. Or was it London? It might have been LGM. It might have been 4 years ago at London then, was his first release. So that was really the first time he talked about it. He's come a long way with it since. Andreas is also a packager for a lot of projects. He's doing great work. Rapid Photo Downloader from Damon Lynch. This past year he's added support for high efficiency codecs. These are, I don't know how common they are on Android, but on iOS it's a common video and photo storage mechanism for much higher compression ratios at the cost of maybe a little bit of quality, but perceptually maybe not as much. Much better high DPI support and fixing bugs where you couldn't access the phones any longer through GIO GVFS after changes. RawProc. This is Glenn Butcher is the author of this processing. This is a one man's attempt to make a GUI equivalent to DC Raw. If anyone remembers DC Raw as an old raw decoding project. So you can check that out on the forums as well, but he's got a lot of, he's got kind of like a tool chain processing pipe where you walk through it, and then when the image is open, you'll just add you'll add new processes to the sequence of processing in the pipeline. It looks like a tool, like a tree structure when you take a look at it, and now he's able to maintain throughout the hierarchy results from previous nodes in his graph. So everything's working in 32-bit float. And he's another person that's being very careful about color management stuff to make sure that things are maintained all the way through. GIMP, it's a project I'm partial to, has had a lot of things happen over the last year. So some usability improvements in GIMP. You can now display and edit pixels that are outside of the canvas boundaries. You know, you can actually see that even though you have a canvas, things that fall outside of it are now visible and editable if you want it to be. You can edit hidden layers if you're hiding them in the layer stack. Transform tools can now be adjusted on canvas even after zooming in and out. You can go to a particular layer by pointing at any of its pixels and hitting Alt middle click is a new shortcut. Curves and filters are now more predictable and come with some different kinds of node available for modifying the curve itself. All the parametric brushes now have 32-bit per channel precision. The bucket fill tool for line art is something that Jean had shown off for the first time last year at LGM, which was in Saarbrücken. Yeah, this is cool. If you haven't seen it before, I should have put a video up. But for artists that are doing coloring of line drawings, if you have a line drawing and the lines aren't closed, you can still bucket fill in that area, and it'll close that gap for you automatically. This is based on some work he had done with the GIMP project on an algorithm for closing that gap in a smart way. Sample merged option now for the heal tool allows non-destructive retouching on a separate layer, so I can actually heal and put the results of a heal operation on a new layer, not the one that I happen to be pulling the sample from, so I can sample across the stack. That means I can turn that layer on and off without affecting the other layers in the stack, which is nice. Foreground Select has a grayscale preview mode now, and the Offset tool now lets you kind of shift pixels around and wrap around the canvas so you can create tileable textures much easier in GIMP now. We have some more format support. You know, we had a lot of people suddenly spoke up about a DDS support, and it's not something that I use very much. It's a format, I think, for game engines of some kind. Is anyone familiar with DDS as a I'm not personally, but I know that we had a lot of people. There used to be a plugin, and it kind of fell by the wayside. It wasn't supported any longer, so we have it natively now. Layers are preserved in a TIFF file, and if you load a TIFF with an unspecified channel in it, GIMP will ask you how you want to handle it, but don't write TIFF files, they're insane. And now we have ICC profiles in high efficiency formats are available for both loading and exporting when we use live, when you compile with live HEIF 1.4.0 and newer. And then the underlying graphics engine that powers GIMP, called Gegel, generic graphics library. This is Oyvind Kolas Pippin, if you're online. And so he's got a lot of color space work was done. This is L. Stone, who was on the Pixels forums and is well-versed in color management, was able to provide some help in getting that done. We have a lot of changes in the standalone Gegel tool. So now node-based compositing and video playback is available. Much better CMYK support, which is going to make, by my estimation, 3/4 of the internet happier now. So we'll get CMYK support much, much better. And he can now do much better utilization of CPU threads when he's doing some of the processing, better memory management, especially on larger images, and some work on the cubic sampler for downsampling when downscaling images. Cyril recently joined us at the Pixels forums this past month, I want to say like a month and change ago, and came on board to have all of their discussion forums hosted and handled by us. They've had a release in November. They've got a new YouTube channel they just started up with relevant videos about using it. If you haven't before, it's an astronomical image processing tool. Usually these are things like stacking and noise reduction and stuff that astrophotographers tend to specifically need. They're on GitHub now. They've got a 1.0 version coming down the road with a bunch of UI refactoring. And now they've got the floating point precision. I think it's already in there, is what I read maybe just a day or two ago. So they've got a full floating point high precision, which you need for these astrophotos. I think you can load 64-bit FITS files, but I have to double check with them. LuminanceHDR is a complete solution for producing high dynamic range tone mapped images, or just high dynamic range images that you want to create an HDR with. So they've added 4 new tone mapping operators, which I honestly didn't even know came out this year, but apparently there were 4 new tone mapping operators this year. Speed optimizations for doing the tone mapping and for HDR creation. This was mostly the work of one of the RawTherapee developers, Ingo Weyrich, who's some kind of wizard when it comes to optimizing things. Post-processing gamma and saturation are now available, and you get previews in the HDR wizard creation. Anyone ever used LuminanceHDR before? Oh, some people maybe. Yeah, the project is alive and kicking and moving. Same thing with HDR merge. They didn't have a ton of new things that happened this year, mostly just a migration to Qt5. HDR merge is similar in that it'll take a stack of images and combine them to produce the most noise-free result, not necessarily the highest dynamic range. So it'll shift that the exposures and then grab the cleanest sections from each of them. Geeky. This is a lightweight image viewer I'm sure many of you are familiar with. They had a 1.5 release back in July of 2019 and a partial implementation for high DPI. Multi-display full screen works a little better. They use GPS lat long to get the local time corrected for UTC offset. The markings and image connections can now be saved in a text file optionally. They got show star ratings, and they've implemented regular expressions for their searching. Photoflare is a relatively new project. I think I ran into the developer just last year at LGM in Saarbrücken. They've been moving quick. This is kind of a simple photo editor with some simple image editing, and he wanted something that was quick and relatively easy to use for his workflows. They've had 5 new releases over the last year or so since LGM. 25 bugs fixed, 12 new features, new translations. They've got user documentation at GitHub. They've been doing packaging in Flatheck. A bunch of new keyboard shortcuts are available, and they're using OpenMP to utilize multiple threads, because I think graphics magic is what drives Photoflare under the hood for the most part. And he's been literally on the edge of his seat to come out here and yell at you about fonts, so I'm going to turn this over to Nate Willis. Were there any questions on the photography side before he steals this from me? Yes. There's like 4 slides, so you missed a bunch. That depends on what you mean by that and to what level you mean by that. So, he's asking if GIMP is truly a parody for Photoshop, and it's highly dependent on your workflow. Probably not. If you have a very, very advanced workflow where you're doing lots and lots of unusual things that are very Adobe specific, or even not so advanced. So things like adjustment layers don't exist just yet, but they're coming. But for most folks, I have yet to find a situation where I wasn't able to produce result in the same result from Photoshop, maybe through a different means in GIMP, generally. So. Sure, yeah, no, Digicam and Darktable both have like Facebook and maybe Instagram connectors. Maybe not Insta, but they're Facebook connectors for sure, Flickr connectors, and possibly more. I don't use the feature much, but I know that it exists. Yeah, Digicam has like 50 export options, for example. But if you catch up with me afterwards, I can absolutely try to fill you in a little bit more if you'd like and point you to something. And if it doesn't exist, we can make it, because it ain't that hard. Plugging into those social things. Famous last words. It ain't that hard. Easy peasy. I'm going to listen to some fonts, so don't go anywhere just a minute. We got some cool font stuff coming up. So I'm going to give this to Nathan. Are there any other questions before I hand this off to Nate?
All right, well, as the crowds pour in through the doors, I kind of split the font stuff into a couple different categories here. The big font creation tool in free software is still FontForge. It's been around for close to 20 years, and still does more than almost any free or proprietary font editor out there. In 2019, there were 3 releases, which is quite a lot. It sort of ebbs and flows, depends on when there's a big change in what people want format-wise, if there's a lot of activity. The big news on that front since last year is that all plugins and things using Python 2 are deprecated now. And this is really, I mean, that's a hard change for anyone to make. It will upset some people, sure. But there are also new features, such as allowing users to decompose a glyph into components that can be reused. This is the kind of thing you would see if you have a letter that is a composite of a base letter and a diacritic mark or something like that. So more flexibility in doing that just speeds up producing large character sets. The other exciting thing that's maybe not so visible is that there are several new developers contributing to the project who have been hacking away at reducing some of the technical debt of the sort of in-house GUI toolkit that's been around since the earliest days. And so collapsing some layers of complexity there is eventually going to let it run on top of standard GTK, and that in turn makes things like better Wayland support possible. That's sort of been on the to-do list for ages, so it's exciting to see people making progress on that. A few other sort of like technical details there. FontForge now supports version 3 of the UFO file format, and this is an interchange format that a whole bunch of proprietary tools and other editors use. It stands for Universal Font Object, and it's XML based. So FontForge actually has better support than almost anything else for this. FontForge can also now produce WAF2 files, which are the highly compressed files you do when you're using web fonts. And WAF2 has a totally new compression algorithm they cooked up just for that, and it's like 40% smaller than WAF1 was. And FontForge now supports Unicode 12.1, which 12.1 was the point release where they added the new symbol for the new name of the Japanese era that changed when the emperor resigned and his son stepped up. The other thing to consider in fonts is not the editor, but what you do with it. And when it comes to that side of fonts, the big news is variable fonts, which was a change in OpenType 1.8 that allowed you to have all the different styles of a font sort of encoded into a single file as essentially deltas. And that's vastly smaller than having 18 different font files, and also lets you sort of adjust sliders and arrive at weights in between. And Google Fonts has had people working on adapting its open source fonts that existed in multiple styles into a variable font version. And usually this happens transparently when it comes to your browser, but if you want to dig into the font library, you can see which releases support this, and you can download those and use them on your desktop. And I mean that literally for people using Linux, because variable fonts are supported not just in Inkscape, as you saw in the Inkscape slide, but in all the web browser engines, Chrome, Firefox, and now WebKit GTK. So that means maybe some GTK desktop apps will be able to start transparently supporting that as well. Thanks to Matthias Klassen at Red Hat, they also work in GTK and GNOME. So GNOME apps can use variable fonts. You don't necessarily need to see all those sliders, but it's some pretty rapid adoption for a brand new and unusual technology. Maybe the other thing to consider when it comes to making fonts is that there's a lot of ways to do it. So even though I said that FontForge was still the heavy hitter, there are some other maybe smaller font projects. One of those that's interesting is TrueFont, which is a pure Python-based free software font editor, and it's been picking up additional developers recently, and it's still maybe not as featureful as FontForge, but the fact that it's entirely written in Python makes it able to use a lot of other code that exists out there. And a lot of people in the font business make utilities in Python, and adding those as plugins to TrueFont is pretty easy. I've also seen this past year several interesting tools released as free software, even though they're designed to run on Macs. And there's two examples there. One is called Font Goggles, which is sort of an inspection thing, especially for really complex fonts that let you dig into the features and how they work. And the one that you see a screenshot of on that G is called SpeedPunk. And what that is a visualization tool that's showing you the sort of degree of curvature of the curve at every point. So when there's a discontinuity, you may not be able to see it with your eye, or just looking at the shape, but SpeedPunk allows you to like see, oh, that's actually slightly unsmooth right there by sort of exaggerating those curves. So it's interesting to see people, even if they're using a different operating system, release some free software for building fonts. And the last thing down there is 2 tools that are used for like building and testing fonts. Getting fonts to work is a very QA intensive process. FontMake is a production tool for generating things from source, and it supports even the proprietary font formats, which means if you see something that says it's open source, but it requires a font editor that you have to pay money for a Mac, you can actually still build the font. And Font Bakery, the last one there, is sort of a massive test suite. Make sure that if you have a bunch of styles, they all have the same characters in them and they all build correctly and that sort of thing. And so those are very important tools, even though they're not maybe as glamorous to look at. I can go ahead and do the desktop publishing section. I'm going to have to wing it on a couple of them, I think. Scribus is the big GUI DTP app for building complex documents, and I think they just made one release since last year. That was 1.5.5. It's pretty stable, so there's not a long list of changes there. Dark UI theme support is probably important to some people. There are a lot of changes to the script writing engine, and there is improved support in what they call complex scripts, which are things like Arabic and index scripts where the shapes of things change as you type. So getting hyphenation and proper numbering working on those is actually a lot of work, and it's now supported in Scribus. And also you will see improved messaging when you load a document and there's like fonts missing. And if it just changes, and that's not very helpful, so better reporting back is an improvement. Laidout is a tool written by that man right there, which I guess you would say originally was done for page imposition, but has since expanded to cover all kinds of production workflow things that Tom uses in his projects. And I'm reading this for the first time. Automatic app image development builds, that is certainly a sort of one-click installation solution for people. HTML gallery export is new, and object bleeding across pages. I'm not sure what kind of objects those are, Tom. You have any? Okay, so objects that you have stretched across multiple pages now are properly stretched across multiple pages without being clipped and cut off. And also object clipping, I think I can guess what that means, which is that when you need to clip an object like an image around something else, or you just want to only show part of it, you can edit the clip path easily. Is that right? Okay, great. Whew. I'm relieved. And then last but not least, LibreOffice Writer is probably what a lot of people use to make most documents. Scribus is a bit overkill. A lot of improvements in the past couple releases on LibreOffice Writer, including it's easier to successfully edit tables, moving rows and columns around needs to work, and pasting things like copying multiple cells and pasting them into multiple cells works. You can now also toggle a setting so that when you're moving objects on the page, if you don't want them to overlap, they will automatically be scooted to the side so they don't sit on top of each other. You can also write bottom to top text, which is not a different language. It's just if you want to have a rotated text object, it now lines up correctly and you can justify it. The improvements to editing auto-numbered lists are things like if you have a numbered list and you remove an item in the middle, it doesn't break the numbering. And full edge-to-edge page backgrounds. I guess I didn't realize this was work that needed to be done, but yeah, you can now set a background that does not have any margin on the edge of the page. And there's a lot of work that went into improving building forms on LibreOffice Writer and to supporting unusual combinations of features in Word and DocX, things like having endnotes and having embedded charts and things that are more complex documents. This is just about David Revoy. Mica, how would you like to tell us about that?
So if you don't know David Revoy, he's a a French illustrator and artist. He produces mostly a comic called Pepper and Carrot. It's very good. The week before, he actually published the results of trying to use only free software to print an anthology of the Pepper and Carrot comics. It's a really great article if you are into prepress and free software. It ended up being much more difficult than you would think from the outset to use a commercial printer to produce a full CMYK document for like mass printing. So he did a ton of work, and now we all get to reap the benefits of that work. Yeah, so much like color management from your screen to your photo printer, we have the same thing for books and comics, except it's much more specific. There's specific coatings and specific paper that produce vastly different looking output if you don't calibrate for them correctly. So having this is an excellent resource if you're making comics that aren't just black and white, or trying to do any type of mass publishing. So real shout out to him. That was a lot of work, and he did it at his own expense too, and shared the results. Thank you to all of you for showing up to the third annual LibreGraphics track. If you need more graphics, May 26th in France, there is the LibreGraphics meeting, which is both users and developers. There's everything from contributing code to, last year they had like photo workshops and sketching and all kinds of things. So not just for developers, if you can make it there. Yeah, and France is wonderful in the summer, so there you go. Thank you guys for coming out, and thank you for sticking around to the last talk on Sunday.